My name's Timothy Chalamet.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Scrutinise This, where we analyse and discuss and finally review all kinds of movies. In this series, we'll be discussing all the Best Picture nominees at the Oscars, and in this episode, we are going to be discussing American Fiction. Now, my name is Bardi. I am the podcast novice, well, when it comes to movies.
Well, anything
and
really.
With me, I have two... And with me, I have two of the soundest minds in the movie industry. Well, one sound mind and Rowan, since you want to, start sending shots. First up, we've got Dennis.
Timothy Chalamet. Hi, my name is Timothy Chalamet.
Fucking hell.
Nice to meet you.
There we go. And the powerhouse himself, Mr. Rowan Pierce.
Salam alaikum, my good friends of YouTube.
There we go. So as I mentioned, we are going to be discussing American Fiction. Now, if you haven't watched the movie yet, watch it first. Spoiler alert, we're going to be analysing every single frame of this movie. So if you haven't watched it, go and watch it first, then come back and listen to the episode, as well as the other episodes as well that we've done. Now, the movie American Fiction, it is about a kind of frustrated black author who is not happy with how much his book is selling, and all of the literature that he obviously does publish gets categorized into the kind of black section. So when he goes to a bookstore, his books are in the sort of black. Was it Black American? Is it African American area section?
Yeah, I think so.
I believe so. Yeah, the African American section, even though it's got nothing to do with African American. So he's a frustrated writer, and he tries to make it in the industry. So what he does is he ghostwrites a story that he thinks, as a joke, that he thinks that black people would like, and it ends up being a bestseller. And the reason why he does this, because he has this competition called Centara, who's also selling books that cater to the black community, and he feels like he's not doing the black community justice. So he ghostwrites this story, and it ends up being a bestseller, and it also ends up being made into a movie. But alongside that, it's also a kind of comedy, and it has aspects of romance as well, where he develops a relationship with his neighbor whilst he's looking after his mum. So there's so many avenues with this movie that it touches upon, but that's a brief summary. But hey, that's a novice's summary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it over to Rowan, who's going to give a professional one for you guys to... Rowan?
No, I think that was a pretty good summary.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's probably the best one.
It really is.
So far.
It really is. You're getting better at this, for sure.
Yeah.
Guys, stop it. Seriously, you guys are having me on.
If you get too good, do we get relegated? Do one of us, either myself or Rowan, get relegated to novice? We'll switch roles afterwards.
It depends how racist Dennis is going to be in this episode.
Well, there you go. This is going to start off spicy. I can see people are going to comment at this point now. They won't watch it beyond this. They're going to say, "Oh, he's the racist one. He's the worst one." But yeah, good.
But no, I think that was a good enough summary. I think we should dive right in. Let's save our viewers valuable time and get into the juice.
Before we get on to the first questions, before you guys get into this, please, everyone, if you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, like us on Instagram, share the videos, give us review, as Dennis just did. Now someone giving us a bit of feedback. We do take everything on board. We do discuss it at length when Dennis has the time to obviously reply to mine and Rowan's messages, because obviously he's a busy guy. But please do like the videos, do share them, leave a comment if you can, because it does help us obviously to continue doing these going forward. Now, on to the questions. Do you think this film will open doors for people of colour to create art that will be about what the author wants instead of what the community wants? So I'm going to throw that question firstly to Rowan. Do you think this film does a good job at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this film might be sort of part of a new wave of people, and particularly black writers and black artist creators, who are kind of challenging being pigeonholed into a certain category in order to sell stuff, right? Cord Anderson, who directed this film, he basically said the American experience is often polarized into slavery on one hand, and then you have the American president, Barack Obama, and it's like those absolute polar opposites, and there's really not enough representation or stories of people in the middle of that vast spectrum. And this film does a great job, not only of communicating Jeffrey Wright monk's sentiment of having these more complex, more nuanced stories of the black experience, but the film also does it. The film doesn't just have black stereotypes; it has a well-rounded sort of representation of the characters, the family members, who are all pretty sort of upper class, or upper middle class. They've obviously come from originally a place of oppression, but it's kind of about their story of how they adapt from that place of oppression into sort of a flourishing, professional class. His brother's a surgeon. He's obviously a writer. He's a professor meets writer type thing. His sister's a doctor. The love interest in the film is a lawyer, I believe. So these are upper middle class. These are moneyed people. So it's about depicting them and showing their story, and not just the story of the oppressed, and then obviously the story of the people who made it right at the top.
Dennis, what's your thoughts on that? Because I know what you like about racism, so please give us your thoughts.
Yeah, this is such a dangerous... Every time you open with that line, it scares me more and more, because it's going to be a bit like a catch-22, right? Or whatever I say is going to seem...
Well, to the listeners, I'm only just joking. Obviously, Dennis is not racist all the time. Dennis, please continue.
Yeah, I sort of forgot what the question was. So you're asking if this is going to open the doors...
What the fuck? What are you doing? What are you doing? You're supposed to be on track. Do you think this film is going to open doors to allow people, let's say, who are part of, let's say, a minority...
Right, sure.
Say, black people. Would this open up the doors to let them know that it's okay if you create something, whether it's music or any kind of art form, for it not to cater the community that you're part of?
Yeah, that's difficult. I think there are a lot of films that have done that in the past. A lot of films. I mean, things like the presence of certain minorities on the screen. Their representation is obviously important. I think in this there is a sort of good kind of sometimes it almost felt a bit like adaptation or something like that. There's a good sort of representation of a writer, an author, an intellectual type, and obviously so Jeffrey Wright, who plays Monk in this, he's sort of this kind of misanthropic kind of almost depressed. I think there's a joke in it where she says you have all the hallmarks of being depressed even though you say you're not, which I thought was actually pretty funny. He's sort of chased by this sort of what he seems to feel, and I guess we can get into the fact that I'm not sure how right he is, but he seems to be chased by this sort of idea of that he's sort of pigeonholed because of his race, and there's maybe elements within the movie where it's maybe even making fun of what it's making fun of, because I don't think that this movie is actually that sort of... I don't think it's that venomous. I don't think it's that biting. I think maybe it might think it is a bit more so. But overall, I can't see this as being the film that would open that many doors, really. Because a lot of the time with things like this, I think it takes... it takes a bit more. And this isn't exactly a movie that's kind of... it hasn't... been caught, cues to go and see it. I don't think it's... I don't know. I'm a bit mixed on it, but... I would say overall, no, not so much. Maybe disagreeing a little bit with Rowan.
But what's interesting is that the book it was adapted from was written in 2001 by Percival Everett. Yeah. It might have been more relevant back then. Yeah. Back in 20 plus years ago. Maybe things have moved on since then. I'm not sure why it took so long for it to be for it to be made a movie, but yeah. I mean, it's hard also to comment on because I don't think any of us have published books, and I also don't think any of us are black. Last time I checked, so it's kind of especially the publishing thing. It's kind of hard for us to know how difficult it is. Can you make intellectually challenging books without them being pigeonholed? Obviously, books need to be marketed to certain demographics and stuff, and there's barriers for that. I don't know if the barriers exist are bigger for black people than other races.
But I don't think it's that's why I said it doesn't have to be just books. It can be any kind of art form that you could be creating for a certain market. So yeah, we may not be black or be publishers, but obviously you guys are filmmakers, and you know if Dennis, every time he made a movie, it was about where he was born from, you'll be catering to a certain audience, but he doesn't do that. He kind of goes against that by making movies with no dialogue.
I knew that was coming. The 8 viewers going to frantically
all the great
Google
movies were made without dialogue before 1927. So
yeah.
Oh, he's done
Listen,
it.
I'm a pre-1927 guy. I always have been. That's sort of my trademark. But the thing is though, Bardi, though, on your point a little bit though. I mean, you.
And then I'll give my thoughts in a second of what I think.
But go on, finish, and I won't interrupt. Go on, finish, and then I'll sort of.
No, I was going to say I think this movie potentially could have done a good job of sending that message across, but I think it does juggle a bit of too many themes. It is a drama, but then also it tries to be funny. Then there's this romance aspect, and then he's got this. I think
there is a lot of things going on. I do get that. And that is actually a criticism which has been leveled to it. But the thing is, I think in a way it kind of works with the character's sentiment. The fact we want to see well-rounded, non-ghetto sort of stereotypical black people. And the family is obviously, I mean, the brother is an interesting character all in himself. He could have a spin-off show, and he's obviously he's going through some sort of
I feel
problems.
like that's coming. Yeah. But
he did a great Sterling K. Brown, the actor.
Brown,
he did a great job with that. But anyway, I feel like the characters are so rounded and so fleshed out. And without if it was just focusing on his profession and the publishing industry and went full into the satire, it would be doing the film sentiment an injustice, and the main characters sort of overriding philosophy and injustice. So in a way, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think in saying that, I mean, one of the things that when I first started watching the movie, I sort of almost fell into the trap of feeling as though Monk was more hero, more so than anti-hero. Because actually, over the course of the film, he kind of becomes unlikable, and I guess the film sort of leans into that, and it's almost I think it's being satirical about being satirical. But one thing I will say is that satire, and we talked about this way back with Barbie when we were just sort of young burgeoning podcasters. Satire is not easy to do, right? And it's not easy to not only get right, but to make it genuinely funny. I think this film, it doesn't get it completely wrong. It doesn't sort of turn into, it's not scary movie levels of just silly spoof, but it's hard to get it right. And Rowan mentioned the fact that this book's it's written in 2001. There's an argument maybe that in 2001 it's a bit more of a poignant tale, but fast forward to now, the film's obviously leans into the world we're in today. The very opening scene kind of leans into that. It seems to be going down a route of, like I said, Monk. He seems to be this almost like Dr. House, a misanthrope type, and he's immediately opens with this argument he has with this student. He's established to us as being a bit of, he's a sort of a grumpy sort of type. But the problem is, because it's set now in this, I don't know, Trump would call it sort of fake news world. I think some of that poignancy is lost a little bit, because when you lean into satire sort of too hard, I sort of lost sense. Sometimes I lost sense of where I was. And you guys are right. I think when you're in the sort of family drama, you sort of collect yourself again. You're like, okay, this is quite nice, right? Because the family drama is the movie's clever way of saying, look, these are sort of true human stories. It's a struggle as any person of any background to see, for example, your mum go through this and your sister passes away. So I don't know, it's a delicate balancing act, but I think it just sometimes does veer off into like a sort of early 2000s, sometimes the comedies is almost a bit Miss Doubtfire, and then you get to that wedding sequence and it goes full, I thought it was sort of Adam Sandler film from about 15 years ago.
Yeah, it had tone issues, which I can agree with.
Yeah,
like,
so, I was
going to say, a film like Thank You for Listening by Boots Riley goes full into which is kind of similar in terms of the sort of black representation and sort of the black experience in a world of capitalism and whiteness, I guess, goes full into the surrealism and the satire. You don't get much of the rounded family characters as much. Potentially, it would work better if it did that. But yeah, I'm a bit conflicted about that aspect, because you watch one scene and it feels it feels so much like a family drama, and it's not. It kind of makes the satirical stuff just feel a bit cheap.
Yeah, because it also, the other thing is that you've got I mean, if we deep dive into the satirical stuff, he's so Jeffrey Wright in this case, a monk. He is an African American author, right? Within the confines of the movie, he begins by saying
he wouldn't agree with that.
Well, exactly this, right? He begins by saying, look, my work is not African American work, and obviously he's very, in that sense, he's right to say so, right? This is a work of, present it as the work it is, as opposed to saying, oh, it's here because of its African American author, right? But then what happens is obviously he spirals into this kind of Jim Carrey sort of situation where he's now this like ghetto writer, and he's come out of jail and he's done this, and it's always a joke. He's written this book in about 20 minutes or whatever. But what happens is now, because you've got these two sort of tornadoes, one of the tornadoes is sort of a genuine family kind of hurricane, but the other one's this kind of silly satirical whirlwind, right, where it's almost, at times you think, is it real? Or obviously by the end of the movie it almost spoofs that itself, by he's sort of showing the alternate endings of the story and so on. But
you also have the contrast of all the white characters pretty much being the most obsequious, stereotypical.
Yeah, and this is a recurring...
I don't have a problem with that specifically, right? But it's about, I mean, when you go from that producer guy who's, I mean, no one... Maybe people act like that in real life. I mean, I haven't been to California much, but, but you go to that...
It's like giving me Dennis vibes.
Then you go to the real depictions of real people in his family. There's a clash there.
Yeah, there's actually quite... I mean, there are some moments that are... I thought, I mean, there's one moment where I forget the character's name, which is poor behavior from me. But so Sterling K. Brown, he's sort of dancing with his mom, and then she says, "Oh, I always knew you weren't a queer." I think she says something Clifford, like that along those lines. Yeah. Clifford, okay. Clifford's dancing with his mum, and his mum. Obviously, we understand there's an element of the mum's. Health issues, but she says, "Oh, I always knew you weren't a queer," and it's in that moment. There's a lot of sort of context and history comes out. It's quite a nice scene, but like I said, because you've got this almost, I think it almost gets a bit tedious kind of satire on the other side of it, which does come to nice fruition at times. I think when he does argue with the other judges, in particular, obviously Issa Rae's character, they have quite a nice argument where she kind of shuts him down in a way I thought was actually very elegant. It does come to some nice climaxes, but I think not enough to sort of self-regulate the sort of satire market, because you sort of have to for the satire to be as impactful as you want it to be, because if it kind of flies off the rails a little bit, you end up thinking, it's just a little bit, it's just a bit weird now.
I think they should have just skipped on the whole comedy aspect of it. Just tone it down, just because it just couldn't balance itself.
I can agree with that. I think a lot of the comedic scenes are full on Jim Carrey comedy, and Jeffrey Wright does a good job, but it's not a comedy film. It's got to find its voice, So it should have depicted those scenes. I mean, when he comes in as Stugger Lee and he's acting as a proper pimp, whatever. Whatever. I mean, the thing is, it doesn't. I don't think.
That's the 50 Cent song from Anatomy of a Fool.
Gentleness. Yeah.
When he obviously is imitating, they almost felt. I found them to be almost a little bit half-assed, right? Because, I mean, if you're gonna do it, lean in a little bit, right? If you're gonna go through this sort of charade of he's playing this kind of character, which I understand, the context of it is somewhat funny. I don't know, funny maybe, sort of in a Blue Streak Martin Lawrence way, but if you're gonna do it, maybe lean into it a little bit more. But I think that is actually one of the problems that we see with a lot of contemporary movies, which is that a lot of the time they will just rely on sort of punchlines, one-liners to sort of drive a beat, right? But you don't have to be so sort of self-reflexive that you think, oh, any joke will work. So I think there needs to be some sort of system. You know, the writers need to look through and be like, this joke isn't that, you know, it isn't that funny, and it seems to be written too much for the audience. And I don't think I really sort of laughed and sort of found
yeah, it's almost like what jokes you can put in the commercial just to make the commercial work. So people watch the film.
Always sort of punchlines.
Honestly, we've made funnier jokes in this show than there were in that film.
And that's saying something, because this is the least funny podcast I listen to, and this is the only one I listen to. So, you know, if there's
exactly.
But yeah, I think I think in your question, I think that your first question. I mean,
is
this the first question still? We've meandered everywhere.
I've kind of
we've detoiled a little bit,
through the second, through to the second question, because I was going to ask, do you think it finds a good balance between comedy and drama, which we obviously have discussed at length now. So, perfect. So, we mentioned earlier that it is directed by, is it Cord Jefferson?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah. So it's his first time directing a movie.
A feature length, yeah.
A feature length, obviously. I mean,
he's done TV. I think he's done TV work, right? I actually don't know his work.
Yeah, what's interesting is he was actually in journalism for 8 years before this, and this is his obviously directorial debut. But I feel like the film is very issue laden and kind of one issue laden, kind of like a journalist would make a film. Sure, I don't feel any aesthetic stuff going on, and it's kind of shot pretty boringly. We can talk about that, but he deals with the issue all right. I mean, there are tone issues, but it could have been done a lot worse. I have a problem just with the boring cinematography. I mean, it's shot like a Netflix show. It's almost overlit. Everything is sort of kind of bit in your face.
Let's jump into that straight away. Definitely. What did you think of the cinematography, Ryan? Firstly, it's recorded in 35mm.
You know, I don't even give a shit. It's like it didn't even cross my mind. It's like that question is above the cinematography of this film. You know what I mean? Yeah. I doubt it is, to be honest. It looked like some Netflix show. It looks indistinguishable from a lot of Netflix shows. It just nothing was really talking to me. And I think that's often the problem with films which are just one issue. You know, all of your attention is focused on you know that thing which is very topical in the sort of zeitgeist, and it's obviously got political ramifications and everything, and it's a bit controversial. So it's almost like they feel they have the license not to be creative with it on a visual aesthetic level. And apart from the music, actually, which we'll go on to later, which I thought was good, I didn't feel there's much sort of aesthetic or stylistic flourish to this.
Yeah, I thought the cinematography, just on a visual aspect, it looked so boring, so dead. I mean, we've discussed the previous nominees in the past, sort of like Past Lives and Maestro, obviously saying they're not good films, but at least they give some respect to the cinematography. In terms of how it looks. This film, it may as well have been recorded on any kind of camera, because it's all about the drama, the comedy, the storyline. That's it. They didn't. It felt like they didn't even have a budget for a cinematographer. Does it have a cinematographer? Can we check?
It does. It does. I wrote his name down.
Fucking hell.
Not like he should have any
He's got a name,
recognition, this guy, no. But
fucking
what's the guy's name? Christian Dunlap. So Christian Dunlap.
Right. Well, he's not getting any more. Yeah, he can go fuck himself twice, because there's no way. I mean, Dennis, what did you think of the cinematography? Because you kind of like this stuff.
Well, you know what? I actually didn't despise it as much as either of you two clearly have. I think
I'm a novice.
I never actually said it was that bad. I just said it's not speaking to me in any way. It's not. Okay. It's not an instrumental part of the experience.
Well, yeah,
it may as well be non-existent.
Yeah, well, you know, it's arguably some people think that's good cinematography actually, but the thing is, if you really, I mean, the very best cinematographers. Even in this series, we've looked at, I think, a few films that have had, you know, high level. We can talk about Oppenheimer's won Best Picture, and I think won for Best Cinematography, if I'm not mistaken. Well, that's a movie that pushes, right? It's about the biggest bomb, and it's the biggest camera, and it's the sort of biggest images, and there's a sort of poetry and a language that's weaved through, and sometimes it's a case of whether you like it or not. Itis, as a doctor would maybe put it. Because sometimes films, like Ron said, you may not really agree, let's say, with subject matter, or you may not relate overly to subject matter, but great filmmaking and great cinematography can relay additional messages. They're like an additional infantry at your disposal. This movie, I think it could be lack of experience from the director. Ron mentioned, obviously, this is someone who's come from a journalism background. Perhaps that does show. I think the cinematographer does play it safe. I can feel, if I had to hazard a guess, I mean, look, I've been unfair, I've Googled it, but it does feel like a director who's come from television, isn't pushing boundaries, which isn't to say that television doesn't, but the tendency is that television doesn't. Is it bad? No, I wouldn't categorize it as bad whatsoever. I think there's far more movies. I think Rowan says it looks like a Netflix movie. In some ways, yes. I think there are movies on Netflix which are, a lot more lazy than this. One thing I will say is that there is an interesting, kind of almost like thought process here, which is that, a lot of the time people who've studied older cinema will know that, in early years of Hollywood especially, it was almost designed for white people to be on the screen, right? And we live in such a sort of almost like post-digital age where we think, switch a camera on and it's designed for everything. But no, actually, a lot of techniques and things like that, even down to the equipment, were actually designed more with white people in mind. I'm not sure if this movie does or needs to. I'm not saying that it needs to do anything to sort of counter that. There are some movies, even more recent movies, if people don't want to dive too far back. I've mentioned Moonlight before on this podcast.
Actually, I was thinking Moonlight is a great example of a filmmaker who knows how to treat light reflecting on black skin very specifically.
Yeah, very conscious. The very conscious use of color, and obviously has motifs driven through that cinematography. The color blue, the use of the lenses that it uses. A lot of decisions made that has the context very clearly in mind. This movie doesn't. But again, as I say, it doesn't detract at all. We went from Anatomy of a Fool is another example where it almost plays it uber simple, right? And obviously with the Anatomy of a Fool, it has in the back of its mind that this is a crime procedural, a court procedural, so it leans into that a little bit. I think there was more space to play here, but nothing bad by any means.
The Anatomy of a Fool, actually, cinematography, it's not a standout thing. It didn't get nominated for the Oscar, but it really did. There were some techniques which really fucking worked for that film. You had the POV, you had just the long takes. It was done deliberately, and I don't think this film had that level.
But that's
of
what I mean. The context of its sort of topic is in the back of obviously the director, the cinematographer, the ADs, everyone. It's in the back of their minds, and sometimes the sort of the bigger a topic is, the more you almost have license to play with it. So in a way, it's kind of a shame sometimes when a movie doesn't. Because, for example, with American Fiction, at the core of it, I actually somewhat enjoy, and not that I can relate to an African American experience whatsoever, but coming from another country, there is a sort of interesting relationship with what you make as being. If people will sometimes even say to me anecdotally, why don't you talk about, the Kosovo War or whatever? And they think, oh, this is all you sort of have to say. And in the back of their mind, there's a sort of cynicism, which is that, oh, you might make money, right? You might make money because people love war and it's interesting and it's, divisive and whatever.
Like sort of trauma porn type thing, right?
Yeah, and obviously the movie plays on that. And it does it in a way where it kind of at times even reminded me of... it's a strange comparison, but the character of Walter White in Breaking Bad, which is that you sort of see him turning into a bad guy. Obviously, this movie, he's not a bad guy, really. He just makes some silly errors, but
he just sells out.
Yeah,
he just sells out.
because he's almost sort of bending too far backwards, right? But in a way, there's an emotional kind of, we understand a little bit as an audience.
Well, that's almost
why
the family and his mum being a character in the film works well, right? It's because that leads him to make this transition and to ignore his kind of philosophy a little bit, just because he has to look after.
Yeah. And yeah, that's sort of relatable. So yeah, it's nice when the filmmaking practice leans into that, and I think for me that's what makes a great film, and I think that's what would have made the difference. I mean, this film was nominated, and there's something to be said about that, but that's what would have made the difference for me between a film being a sort of best movie contender or not. And I think that lack of extra sort of push and energy is what I would sort of say detracted from the overall experience.
Next question. So we have Jeffrey Wright, and he was nominated for the best actor for this movie. Now, before I ask for both of your opinions, I'm going to give mine. I don't think he deserved it, if I'm being honest.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he did. He does a good job in the beginning, and then it just kind of feels a bit flat towards the end. Because in the beginning, he's genuinely frustrated that his work is not getting recognised. He has all this troubles. His mum's not well. His sister dies, and it's like, okay. And then the second he starts to sell out, I just don't feel like he does a good job acting wise. It felt like he lost the character a bit. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I wasn't impressed, and I don't think he should have been nominated for best actor. But let me, obviously, again, I'm a novice. There may have been stuff from there that I didn't see that these two geniuses have. So I'm going to throw that question straight to Dennis first to start off with, and hopefully it won't take more than half an hour. With every question, I'm going to send you a shot.
Getting strays.
You do have a little rambling tendency.
Strays with every question. Listen, last video, someone commented very good point about one of the things I made. Okay, so maybe try backing off a little bit, guys. Maybe ease off the brakes a little bit. Yeah, I actually did like Jeffrey Wright in this, and I like Jeffrey Wright in general. And he's an actor who's, I mean, he was sort of present. Let's say from sort of early 2000s. He's in a movie with Samuel Jackson.
You know, he did Basquiat in 1996, playing the artist. That was his breakthrough role. So he's been playing sort of
see that
racially, I guess, conscious films since the 90s. He was in Ali.
Yes, he's It's so funny how when you say it in English, Ali just sounds like between two houses, We're on. All right. Yeah, Body, to your question about should he be nominated. I liked him in this movie. He's an actor that I've sort of admired for a while. I haven't seen all his work, but he has a few roles which I thought, okay, he's likable, but he's also, and I think actually to go back to why I think he kind of should be nominated, he is in a way sort of perfect for this role. He's a great character actor who it feels like I don't know, maybe struggled is not the right word, because I guess his ambition, not every actor wants to sort of be, the creme de la creme. Maybe he's sort of happy where he is, but it does seem like he's always had the ability to, drive a film, to be a lead. He is a lead in this now. I actually think he does a great job. He, is a sort of misanthrope type. He comes across as, I think, sort of at times charming. I think that the content isn't amazing. Now, we've discussed in terms of the comedy, and maybe a few of the scenes are a little bit too lax. I mean, he's obviously put into this position where he's got to sort of play the ghetto author. I think he's pretty funny. I think when he orders the wine is a pretty okay scene. But in terms of that's
right.
In terms of sort of working with what you have, I liked him a lot actually, and I think he's very believable in that role, and he's got this great ability to he's got a great reaction face, and there's a few scenes in it that warrant it. He sort of seems still, but you can sort of read a lot in his performance, which is difficult to do. And he's good at being angry about stuff, and that isn't
not just
easy.
angry, but kind of like a subdued anger.
Yeah, kind of underlying.
He's not proactively angry, but his he's got this inner sort of conflict going on.
Yeah, and there's a kind of
portrays
almost
really well.
Yeah, there's almost I think some of the great works I mentioned, some like adaptation and a few. Some of the great sort of films about writers or films about creators, sometimes they work best when there is an underlying kind of self-loathing or even laziness about the character, because a lot of the time obviously they're led in their sort of intellectual sort of approach to things, they're led to believe that everything is someone else's fault, and obviously there is major truth to it, but sometimes it works best when they themselves present a slight laziness, a slight self-loathing, which sort of piles on to everything, and I think he does that very well in this. I also think, actually, I think Issa Rae's performance in it is very good. I think she comes across as kind of very charismatic in an interesting way. I think Sterling K. Brown, Ron mentioned him earlier, he could almost have a spin-off. He is pretty charismatic as well. He's got in his own sort of micro universe, he does this, his funny turnaround. He comes out as gay, and there's this constant joke about how he wants to sort of make the most of it. He plays that very well. I actually think performances in this film are strong, and I think sort of us dissecting the directing, the cinematography, the writing, I think if there are problems, they all seem to be there. I think from a performance point of view, it's strong across the board. The white characters that we mentioned, there's a kind of sort of satirical laziness to them, so I'm not going to sort of insist on maybe reviewing their performances too much, but I think the sort of core characters, I think the performances are strong all around.
Yeah, I actually agree. When I really loved the way he was so kind of comfortably self-assured, and the way he doesn't, because there's a lot of things to be said about a lead who kind of acts quite minimally and presents his internal conflicts on camera,
it's not
and
easy.
not his external kind of conflicts. You know what I mean? Because obviously the camera you can only show so much, and you have to show just the right amount to make you look like a believable introvert. So I think he does a really good job. Actually, I was kind of conflicted about whether he should get the Oscar, along with Paul Giamatti. I think Paul Giamatti kind of should have won it for me, but equally Jeffrey Wright did a really good job.
I
think also because he at the root of his character is kind of like identity issues, because as I mentioned before, him and his family are still struggling to grapple with what it's like to be in the middle class or the upper middle class in a white world, and he obviously wants to distance himself from the stereotypes which have been, I guess, promoted by the sort of publishing establishment and everything. And he does it really well. The fact he's called Thelonious is obviously a nod towards Thelonious Monk. I heard also it's a portmanteau. His names are a mix between Thelonious Monk and Ralph Ellison. Ralph Ellison was a literary critic and writer. Okay. So it's obviously nodding towards
Ellison,
the intellectual black voices, and he's obviously portraying that really well. So from a performance, really, really good. I think the things you mentioned though, Buddy, are more, as Dennis mentioned, there are more problems with the directing and the script. The script is lazy, especially at the end, and obviously it has tonal issues. But I think, given that script, he transforms it. I can't really see anyone else doing that good a job. So yeah.
And also, I was going to add.
Fair enough,
I was going to add almost just perfectly to what you ended with, Ron, in terms of the script, is that sometimes the very best performances you can bring out when you've got other performances alongside it, people to sort of interact with. And I think in this movie, for example, I mentioned the sort of, so you have his agent, you have the sort of film industry people, the literary people, the publishers. Because they're done in a somewhat lazy way, it's hard for him to sort of work his magic, if that's sort of the right way to phrase it. For example, his sort of debate with Issa Rae works so well because they both, pull great sort of acting punches, right? They work well with each other. But if you've got this film where, for example, his agent is like a character straight out of like, fucking Rush Hour or something, boring as fuck character. the publishers, they're bordering on just like infantile, right? Nothing funny,
Completely.
nothing
Yeah.
for him to sort of relate, and there's a shame in a way, because not that the movie needs to explore this necessarily, but if we're going to look at these sort of characters as almost being kind of a sort of new racism in that sense, there could have been a lot more that they could sort of play with to get more out of a great character like this Thelonious Monk character, because I think along with the Paul Giamatti character, there's a kind of essence there that makes them very watchable. But unlike Paul Giamatti, because Paul Giamatti's got great people to sort of act off of constantly
And a
throughout
great
the
script as well.
holdovers. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So every other performance there just adds to your own, right? It's a bit like being in a great football team. The better your teammates, the better that you'll play, right? So it's a tough one. So I understand, maybe like Ron says, your sort of perspective on it, but I do think he's been dealt a bit of a tough card, because I think his performance is actually very, very strong. Jeffrey Wright, someone who's hugely experienced. He's sort of he's acted in so many sort of different things, and in this he's got a kind of sheer confidence. Like Ron says, he can drive a scene with very little. He doesn't need too many big set pieces to show his sort of acting chops, which I find very impressive.
Well, I think you're both wrong. How about that? The novice has spoken. All right, fair enough. You guys made valid points to it. Yeah.
Everyone who watches this, let us know in the comment section and prove Bardi wrong.
We do a poll.
Thank you.
Nothing would
100
make me
people
happier.
vote.
The next question was going to be about the music. What you guys thought about the music in the film, because I think it does quite a good job in that aspect to a degree. I don't know if it has its own musical score, but
It does.
it does.
But it's a mixture, so it has some
It's-
great tracks, and it's
some
and
great
it's also
track.
composed.
I think it does.
But yeah, Laura Karpman, I think, so is a female composer. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any more to add to the question?
Yeah, I was just going to find out what you guys thought of the music. 'Cause for me, it was okay. I think it does a good job, but nothing really wow. But it didn't let us down either. So it's kind of a 5 out of 10 for me in terms of the music. But what do you think, Rowan?
Okay, well, I'll preface this by saying I fucking love jazz, and it actually reminded me of a bit like the Sideways soundtrack. You have a bit of Mingus there, you have a bit of sort of bebop-y Miles Davis stuff, and you have this kind of clarinet sound sort of going through scenes quite well. I thought the score was really good, and obviously you have the context of the fact that he's called Monk. He's called Thelonious. And
Yeah.
Is there any Thelonious Monk in the movie? I didn't actually think about that.
There
is
could
none.
well be.
No, there isn't. There
might
isn't.
not be.
There isn't.
There
I
isn't.
checked. There's no Thelonious. I
No
love jazz
Thelonious
as well.
Monk.
I just thought in terms of the movie, it just didn't do it for me. But there is no Thelonious Monk. I know there's a lot of jazz artists in there, but no, ironically, no Monk is played in.
No
But I
Monk.
do think,
Okay.
Bardi, though, that in I think both of you, in a way, I could sort of say you're both right in a way, because I also enjoyed the music. Maybe standalone, I'd put it on a sort of Sunday morning. But I think the way it's used in the movie becomes a bit almost cop-out in terms of editing and driving certain scenes, because I do find it annoying, and this is one of my sort of another one of my pet peeves with the movie, and a lot of, I think, lazier sort of movies do this, but you get to a scene, we get that beat delivered, we get sort of mini sort of climax or interaction, whatever, and then music kicks in, and it does it a lot, and it starts to feel a bit like I don't know, I think there's a line between how good and how dedicated that music is to the movie. If you've got I don't know, Johnny Greenwood on, and he's sitting with you in every step of the film making process, and you've made this sort of hugely dedicated score, then you can throw it on, at every level. But I think just because you've got some nice music, I don't like it getting slapped on every scene imaginable, just sort of drive us and guide us.
I can agree with that. Just sort of slapping on a track and having that sort of instrumentalize the emotion and pushing it into your face
let
a
me
bit.
let me be kind of in my own emptiness of that scene. I don't know how to best describe it. Maybe I'm verbalizing it badly, but sometimes when a scene ends, I would rather, sometimes a cut to another scene is sort of the best. Anyone that's done Russian cinema will sort of know what I'm talking about here. But sometimes just
I know exactly what you're talking about.
sometimes just that cut and move on is the best thing you can do. And when you're constantly driving it with music, it's like I don't even have enough time to contemplate my own feeling on the scene that I've just, seen. And that this movie does it a little bit. It doesn't overdose. It's not the worst example. It's not the worst offender, but it just a little bit too much. The music was nice, but I'm not watching a fucking Starbucks advert. Just relax. Let a scene play out sometimes without it having to...
I tend to agree with that. And also, if Laura Cartman was kind of just playing the same jazzy instrument or had the same instrument sort of musicians, and kind of were really feeling with the feeling, the pacing and the rhythm of the film, and tailoring their music to it, it could have done better, rather than slapping on sort of well-known or kind of bouncy tracks in the right kind of places. It could have done a better job.
But
also the end, I noticed, considering I thought the music was quite good at the beginning, it kind of does descend into like strings and like fucking more orchestral stuff, and it's like, what the fuck are you doing? Dedicate to the jazz.
That really that
dedicate to the jazz.
Do you know,
the thing
that
is,
annoyed me.
Jazz is kind of like the American art form, and obviously the African Americans are instrumental, no pun intended, in that art form, and it's a good nod to have. It's a good nod to that, to have jazz going through. So I think that was a good choice, but dedicate to the jazz to the very end, please.
I think a lot of this film is the first half is good and the second half is shit. It's like they only had budget for the beginning, and then
I kind of actually agree with you. Hopefully that's not too reductionist, but it does. I mean, the ending. What the fuck was that ending?
Right, let's get straight into it. That was going to be my next question, just to ask, with the ending, because I watched it as a novice, and me and the novices got together, we discussed it, we reviewed it ourselves, and we didn't understand what the fuck was going on. Because it cuts a few times, it's like, what, is this all real, or is this all part of a movie?
Yeah.
I didn't understand what the hell was going on.
Because you have him breaking the fifth wall, right? He starts writing the film in himself.
Yeah.
So we have that element, which it works a little bit when he starts writing fuck or my pathology. He gets the scenarios happening right in front of him, the gangster, whatever stuff. So,
Ron's like, I'm not gonna implicate anyone here. Like, there's some gangsters, I'm not implicating anyone.
but with the multiple endings. It's almost like you're trying to satisfy multiple audiences at the same time. You have the shoot 'em up ending, you have the more of the sentimental ending, and it's none of them land with any impact. Yeah, it seems a
so
genuine
dead.
cop out.
It was so rubbish, and then at the end when he gets shot, it's like, do you think police are just going to look for someone based off them just saying they're a fugitive? It just seemed like a little.
If that was the only if that was the only ending, and they stuck with it, and that would at least have some impact. But the fact that it's completely dissipated when you just say, "Oh, that wasn't the fucking." That was, he just he just scrubbed it out from his novel, and
But maybe that is
So
the meta-analysis at play. Maybe it's saying we yearn for something more, so it gives it to us. Yeah, no, I was gonna say to Ron in terms of the very end, because I said that I hated
Rowan, I'm here as well, bro.
The wedding, because I can't see you. For me, I don't, I'm not put you in the equation anymore. But I hated that wedding scene, and I think I don't even know if there's ever been a fucking good wedding scene in any film ever. But the very end of the movie, the scene that you're discussing about sort of multiple endings, it goes off, and he's on the film set.
Melancholia by Lars von Trier.
Okay, to be fair, not a bad example, but I mean, happy wedding, let's call it. The very end scene, there are problems with it from a filmmaking point of view. It does feel lazy. First of all, there's something I dislike about, we've got this one singular static shot, and then we sort of, we get the joke of that he's on the Plantation Madness, or what's the film called at the very end? It's like Plantation Nation or something like that. Annihilation.
Something like that.
Plantation Annihilation.
But
there's something, it's just felt a bit underdeveloped. I think the idea at play, the sense of that we as an audience want a sort of better ending. I kind of get what it's doing. I think we're at a stage where the film has slightly dropped off. The energy's dropped off a little bit. And I think that's why maybe it feels... I mean, I don't think it's overly... You mentioned yourself, I don't think we're overly reducing the film to sort of good opening, bad sort of ending. But I do agree that the second half of the film, it starts to feel, leggy, and it starts to obviously... because there's so much at play, it obviously feels like that you're trying to, end a lot of plot lines and arcs and things like that. To me, the biggest disappointment is that after that argument with Issa Rae, the movie never then sort of gives us, I don't know, true, genuine consequences, if that makes sense. He seems to sort of walk away having learned nothing. And then we get into, like I said, a whole batch of lazy, he has to sit down with a brother and things like that. Things that I think you don't really need. I think you've done enough as a film to develop those characters and things like that we don't need these scenes. I think we could have told other stories in that sort of, my opinion, void there. So that when we get to the very end, I think the idea of the very end is pretty okay. There's almost a charm to it, but we've had to get through, the marshes a little bit to get to it, and it doesn't satisfy enough. It's not good enough to warrant, because we're also coming off the back of last week, what in my opinion, completely different movies, but maybe one of the best endings I've seen, in a long time. So
100%.
to come from that to this, obviously it feels,
it's so
this
difficult.
feels a lot more lethargic. Yeah.
Fucking hell. It's so difficult watching a masterpiece to a master shit. It is difficult. Yeah, it was a bit painful.
You really, a little vitriol in your assessment of the movie, Bardi. I can feel.
We'll have to wait for the review then.
Well, I don't know if you've got another question, but I guess we can sort of, round up, because I am curious to hear your review, because it does feel like, there's a lot of vitriol, and I think neither Rowan and I share it to that extent, so I'll be curious to see what you think.
Okay. Well, can we go straight into the reviews?
Okay.
I'm ready.
Yeah? Unless do you guys have any other points that you want to let the audience know about the movie that maybe...
I think we can round it up. I think in my ending,
I'm going to add a few extra points in my review, so we can go to that.
Okay. Overall, I am going to give this movie a 4 out of 10. 4 out of 10. And I'm being generous. It's only come up a bit now when you have to have a discussion, because it was
so kind of like Oppenheimer territory. Okay.
Oppenheimer is an 8.
The anti-Oppenheimer brigade is strong with Rowan,
Exactly. I'm gonna give it 4. One, you guys kind of do make a good valid point with regards to the lead character, that he is working with a shit script, and it's difficult for him to really shine given the cards that he's dealt. So I'll give him a point for that. Point for the music. I do like the message overall, that if this had the potential to be a great movie, that the message that if you are creating an art form, you don't have to cater just to your community. You should strive to do something bigger and better than that. And the last one is for anyone in payroll that had to fucking walk around that set. That piece. But yeah, overall,
they should always get a point.
They should always get a point
in the industry.
Yeah, 100%, and that's why I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. It's not as bad as Maestro.
Oppenheimer.
Maestro is what I was going to say, and Oppenheimer is still an 8.11 for me out of 10. I've increased it now because of what you're saying, Rowan. But yeah, it's a 4 out of 10. Definitely, it juggles too much. It tries to go into comedy. It tries to do this and tries to do that. It's all over the place. Shit. Guys, I don't even recommend it. Well, obviously, if you listen to the show, you probably already watched it, but I wouldn't recommend it. I'll pass it over to you, Rowan. Rowan, what do you think?
I really do recommend this film. Despite the tonal issues, it does have a sentiment which is important to watch and understand. I like the fact it challenges identity politics. It reveals sort of white guilt and white sort of condescension and self-righteousness, especially from like sort of white liberals. There's the film, right? And then there's the sentiment. And the sentiment is good. and the film is okay, but I think the sentiment needs to be heard. I think it's also good. It's just on this point as well about revealing sort of white liberals who are very sort of obsequious in this film. I think it's worth saying, like, the reason a lot of them like fuck or my pathology is kind of like them. They kind of feel like because of their white guilt they need to absolve themselves, and the way to do that is by only depicting black people in sort of that stereotypical category, because that means that's the way of them feeling like they're getting representation, and they're absolving themselves. So I think that's an interesting perspective, and I like that. I like that sentiment. I'll give the film a 7.
7.
Okay.
Is that your final answer?
Okay, interesting. You threw up something interesting at the end, Rowan. Something that we didn't really get into too much on the podcast. Actually, when watching it, I thought we'd sort of discuss it at greater length, but I mean, you've mentioned it at the end. I'm going to touch on it in my, I guess, sort of roundup. But the sort of white liberal character. See, I read it in the film as the sort of Jeffrey Wright in his sort of misanthropic kind of approach to things. I think he sees these characters as being, I mean, you say obsequious, but yeah, this kind of obedient to sort of a greater liberal agenda. I know that's a sort of mindset that some people have, but my feeling throughout the movie was that he, or at least the film is presenting him as maybe the right intentions, but slightly obviously misguided in some ways. Because I think that sort of white liberal character is almost there. It's almost a sort of set up to say that, you know, while this issue does exist, there's a sort of almost bigger issue overhead. And I think obviously Issa Rae discusses that when her character says, you know, it feels like you have a problem with me, right? She talks about white authors and what they've written about, and she says, you know, plainly, she says, for me it feels like your problem is with me, not with sort of the greater issue. And I think sometimes you know, and in a way I think the movie, I've read it as the movie actually getting it quite right in a way, but I think because it presents it in a way that you've just said, I think it's on slippery territory, because I think if you do start to present it as in, you know, the racism comes from a white liberal, for me that's quite there's almost a perversion to that idea. So I think, I don't know, it's risky for me. The film's on quite risky territory if it seems to function in that way. I didn't overly read it in that way, but your sort of ending made me think.
No, but that's obvious a sentiment. It's not a film written. Sorry, I was going to say it's not a film written by white people at all. The authors, they're all pretty much, the whole cast is black, and the whole movement behind it is black. So it kind of makes you think,
sure,
maybe there is an issue there.
Yeah, but the movie itself is telling us that just because the author is black, it doesn't make that text an immediate, you know, it doesn't make it an immediate, you know, passage of righteousness, you know, because in the movie itself, you know, we have an author who creates this, you know, simulacrum of a struggling, you know, what is it, a prison? Obviously, he jokes about what he's in prison for, but he creates this sort of fake author for this sort of exact reason. So I don't know, there's a complexity to it, but I think if people come off watching this movie thinking that you know, adding the liberal to it, the liberal affix to everything, I think it's a bit more.
Wait, just because you don't like the way that word comes off?
Trigger mode.
Maybe remove yourself from this. Let's have an objective review, please.
Yeah.
Oh, he's done you.
I don't think that's quite the. I don't
Liberal
think that's quite
tears,
the case.
honestly.
Yeah. I don't think that's quite the case, and I think again, it's difficult because I do think now that you've mentioned it, it's maybe more problematic than I thought in in the first place. But it could be a case of overreading. You know, you can be guilty of that when you sit down and talk about a film for an hour. The one thing I will say is that there are movies. To go back to Bardi's very first question, if someone wants to set out and watch a movie about the effects of racism on characters presented on screen, I think this is just another great example of it in its own way. Lessons to be learned. It's difficult, and Rowan said at the beginning, because none of us here are are from that background or from that place, or have that race or whatever. It's maybe difficult to sort of read it wholly, but yeah, I'm not going to dive too into it because we're at the very end, but my score of it is a 5 out of 10. But a majority of those issues are, like I said, I think the film, it does feel a bit lethargic at the end. The cinematography and a few things that I mentioned, I think it just doesn't drive as much as it could. It's not as exciting as it could be. And there are parts I just felt were a bit lazy. So not bad by any means, but I think it's a movie that if someone wanted my genuine opinion about, let's say they said movies about writers or movies about maybe slightly more neurotic characters and whatever, I think I could probably have a better example for each one. So I'm going to end it on a 5 out of 10.
5 out of 10. Yes, Dennis. See, you understood the film. Not like Rowan over here giving it bloody 7. Fucking hell.
Now I'm just looking at what it actually won for, if it won anything. Do you guys know?
I think
quite important info we should relate to our...
I don't know.
It looks like it won for best writing. That's
adapted screenplay.
Yeah, best adapted screenplay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah. What the fuck?
Okay. I think Jeffrey Wright would be the only one I'd add on to that.
Yeah. I wouldn't. Yeah. I would maybe. Yeah. I don't say add. I would maybe replace with. I don't think. I wouldn't say it was an amazing script. But yeah. Okay. Each their own.
Okay.
Okay, lads.
Perfect.
Listen, we've done the Oscars.
Is that it?
We've done this.
Next
is
week,
series.
the Razzies. Joking. Yeah, next week is a mystery for all the listeners. It's a mystery for us three, let alone the fucking listeners, what we're going to be doing next week. But I guess we'll wait and see, I guess.
We're effectively out of work.
Straight to the job centre.
I'm signing on. I can't do anything else.
We're going to hibernate.
Just sign on for a new camera.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Don't worry.
Webcam, please.
Don't worry, because all of this has been recorded.
We'll be back soon.
Yeah, we're back soon. Something new and exciting. All right.
So we're going to be doing a new series, a different bunch of films that we will be reviewing.
Whoa! Don't spoil it,
in
amigo.
The meantime,
don't spoil it, amigo.
No, it's right.
In the meantime, thanks for watching. In the meantime,
okay.
Pleasure.
Like, subscribe, review, share everything.
Yeah.
If you watch the film,
email it,
fax it. Love you all.